Hi, I'm Paul, the Happy Gilder. Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to cover the digital process to create sort of pretty ornate scrolls in Photoshop. Now, if you're new to the channel or new to Photoshop, I'd recommend checking out this video that I made, which covers the tools we'll be using in a bit more detail. But before I crack on with that, if you're a fan of reverse glass, sign painting, gold leaf, digital processes and much more, then you're in the right place because that's all this channel's about, and I usually release a video every week. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description. I reward my patrons with a different vector design every month, and if I get the video finished early, I release that to the patrons as well. Also, there's a link to my Etsy shop where I'm selling some of my vector designs, and also a link to my Flickr account and the Happy Gilder Facebook group. That's now over 250 members, and we're all kind of sharing ideas, posting work and stuff like that. It's a really good place to be. Anyway, that out of the way, let's crack on with the vid.
Right, as always, I'm just going to start with a blank document and a blank interface as well, so I can go and get the tools that I need to perform this action, which are, as always, my layers. Then I'm going to need my brush settings, and I'm going to need my paths. At the moment, I don't need my brush settings, so I can just close those or minimize that window, and then whenever I need them again, I can sort of pop them out using the little arrow. So just hide them away for now. Now, I need my rulers, so I just press Control and R, and that gets my rulers up. I don't need them in any specific format. It could be inches, centimeters, pixels, whatever. So I'm just going to drag the first guide in from the side, and that will snap to the center. And I'll do the same down the middle, and then that means we've just got the canvas neatly divided up into 4. So, first thing, I'm going to create a new layer. And then using my marquee tool, which I can access by pressing M, I'm going to hold shift and then drag to make a square. Now at the moment my palette settings are set so that white is my foreground color, so that'll be my paint color, so I want to swap those around, so I just press X. If you've got different colors set in here, if you press D, it'll reset to black and white. So now I want to go to my paint bucket, which is the second one down in this menu, and I'm just going to fill that black. I'll click Control and D to deselect, and I'm just going to drag this somewhere on the screen. I think probably about there, just somewhere on the bottom part of that line, and it will snap to the bottom of the line. So if I hold Control and Spacebar, that'll bring up my zoom tool, and I can zoom in a bit. Now, this might seem a little bit weird while I'm doing this, but it'll all make sense once we get going. So I'm going to duplicate layer 1, which is just a square, by right-clicking on the layer and going to Duplicate Layer. And then I can drag this below it. Now all I'm going to do is separate these up using the guides as well. So if I drag a guide in, that'll snap to the center of the square, and then the same horizontally. It'll snap to the one that's selected in the layers palette, so then I can just go select this one and drag that, and that'll snap to the center of that. And I'm also going to drag one that snaps to the edges. And that is going to be our sort of framework for creating the nice kind of smooth curve around a scroll. So my next step, I'm going to go to my pen tool, which is located here on the toolbar, or you can press P and that will access the pen tool. Now, when you're drawing with the pen tool, it basically just clicks and adds points. But if you're near a guide, certainly a crossed guide, if you're quite near it, it will ping it to the center. So you don't have to be very accurate with this. And that's where I want this one. So I'm going to bring that along to the next point and click, and that'll snap to that. Now what I want to do next is use the actual curve options on the pen. So if I just hide my black layers at the moment so you can see this a bit better, the pen tool draws straight lines when you're just clicking, but if you click and then hold and drag, it draws curves. Now I have done a tutorial on using the pen tool, so I'll put a link to that in the top right of the screen. But for now what we're going to be doing is a mixture of straight lines and curves. So I'm going to get my squares back up. I'm actually going to drag another guide in that snaps to the edges of these here. So now all edges and all the center bits of the squares have been selected. Now that I've got all the guides in place, I can either delete or turn off the layer visibility because I don't need them anymore. So at the moment, I've got a path that starts here, is going to here, and then I want to continue it on. So I'm going to click to the next point, which is here, but that's not what I wanted to do because I don't want this to be a straight line. So if if I press Control and Z, that'll undo it. And I'll click again, but this time I'm going to click and drag. And as you can see, the handles actually snap to the points as well, and that's exactly what I want it to do. So I can let go now. And then when I click on the next one, because this curve handle here is determining where this curve is going to go next, I don't have to actually do any clicking and dragging. But I will do here, so I'm going to do the exact same thing. Click, drag, it snaps to the point, and then just click and hold here. And then I can just go out here, and that's it. That's going to be the basis of our curve. So for now, I can hide the guides, which is Control and colon. And if I just click on and off the path, that is what we're going to be using to create, the basic shape of the curve. So let's go back to the layers and clean up this palette and get rid of everything we don't need. So, and that is just the little squares. So I'm going to drag those into the bin and then just create a new blank layer. Now what I'm going to use this path for is to run a brush along it, and that's called stroking a path. So if I go to brush, and I can do that by pressing B, up here I've got my brush settings, and that's a very big brush, but I can change the size of that by pressing the sort of square bracket keys. I'm not quite sure what they're called. So if I hold that, that's going to go down, and at the moment that's 20 pixel brush, which is quite big, but for the purposes of a demo, I think it's probably about right. And then all I'm going to do on this layer here, let's get this up. I'm going to go into my brush settings that I got earlier and make sure that I've got a brush which has got 1% spacing. Now a lot of these brushes, if you're just selecting a default brush, will have something that's around about the 20, and that means when you're stroking this along here, you'll have a sort of bumpy line because there's spacing in between the brush strokes. So I'm just going to put that at 1, which it was at anyway, and then press this button here on the paths menu, which will stroke the path. So you can see that's just use that brush and then run it all the way down this path. So I'll click off the path for now, and then I don't need that for the moment, so I'm just going to hide that. And I'm going to hide these, so that's just cleaned up the interface a little bit. Now what I'm going to do with the layer I've just created, I'm going to duplicate that. And you can't see that anything's happened because the layer is on top of the other. But if I then drag this, you can see I've now got 2 layers that are the same, and this is what's going to make up the kind of ribbon for this scroll. And it depends on how sort of fat you want it or how thin you want it as to where you place this, but I'm going to go for something like this. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another layer, and that's just going to be something that's going to join these up. Now I'll keep them separate for now, and I'll tell you why once they're done. I'm just going to go back to my pen, open up my paths again, but I actually want this path for something that I'm going to do afterwards. So if I just started drawing now, it would either draw on this path or it would just replace it with another one. So if I double click on it, that saves the path, and it means now when I click anywhere, it creates another work path, which is what I want. So I'm going to zoom in here, find somewhere around the center, it doesn't matter where because we can come back and edit this. Click, and I'm going to hold shift so that it comes directly down. Press B to go back to the brush, and I haven't changed any of the settings here. And on a new layer, I'm just going to stroke that path. And I'm going to just duplicate that layer. And then I'm going to drag that one into the lower part of the scroll. Now you can do micro adjustments on these with your arrow keys, so that's not quite lined up. So if I just nudge that in, that looks a bit nicer. And hopefully you can sort of see this coming together now. So what I'm going to do is now go to my eraser tool. Now you can press E, and it should be the eraser tool by default. If not, it'd be one of these, but you want just a bog standard eraser, and you want a brush that has got a hard edge. So when you come up here, if your brush is set on default soft brush, just drag the hardness up. Then I'm going to come in here, find out which one of these 2 it is, just by turning them on and off. And then using the eraser, and you can be quite crude because these are quite fat lines. just erase that. And I'm pretty sure that's going to be the same layer. And there you go. It's starting to come together nicely now. So what I'm going to do is just add something a little bit more decorative for this end bit here. So go and get a new layer. Then just come in here, find the center of this line, and then just something like that probably. Get my brush tool, a stroke, and that's that. So I mean, that looks pretty nice, and it's a nice sort of basic outline. But what we can do, having the path that we kind of used to draw the original scroll, is do some shading. And I'm going to do that again by stroking the path with lines, but then after that you can get sort of different weights to the shading by using the actual stroke tools within the layer effects. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to group these. So I'll just shift select all of them, press Control and G, and I'm going to just rename that by double clicking on it and calling this scroll. And then I can now put another layer. Now this is a layer above this group. This means I can turn all of these off in one go if I want to. And now I'm going to go back to the original path. So you can see it's still in the right place. And what I'm going to do is just lower my brush size. So I'm going to go something like 7. So if I press Control and T, I'm just going to shift this down using the arrow keys, somewhere like that. Okay, so now that path is in the place that I want it, I'm going to make a few amendments to it. Now firstly, I want 3 variations of this path. So I'm going to drag this into this little plus icon here. Now I've got 3 versions of this path. And what I want is a bit for the top, a bit for the middle, and a bit for the bottom. So if I go to my arrow key, but then go to the direct selection, which is the white arrow. So if I drag this to here, I can now delete all of those. Well, I can now delete that path up to the point where I want it. So that's exactly what I want for this. And I'm going to name this path top. Duplicate that again because I think I deleted it. I'm going to do the exact same thing for the middle. So using the arrow key, let's just drag this out a bit. I don't want this bit. And I don't want this bit. I'll call that one middle. And then do the exact same for the bottom one. So drag all those, delete, rename that. And that's it. So starting with the top, that's in the right position. I've got a new layer. I've got my brush and it's gone down to 7 pixels. Now what I'm going to do is stroke that path. And while I come off that, you can see that's just done that along the top. What I'm going to do with that now is duplicate it. And this being the most important part of this, I'm going to select this for transform. So I press Control and T, and then using my arrow keys, I'm going to nudge it down to about where I want it. So let's say about there, if that's about right. Press return. And now because I actually selected transform rather than just move that with my arrow keys, it's recorded what I just did. And if I hold down Control, Shift, Alternate and T, or Control, Shift, Alternate and press T, that will duplicate that exactly the same again. So holding down Control, Shift, Alternate, and I'm just going to keep tapping the T key until I've got enough lines that I'm happy with them. That looks pretty good. You can always reposition these after, pushing them up a little bit. So I'm now going to just merge these, Control E, and I'll call these top shading. And do exactly the same thing, create a new layer, go to the middle, press B, stroke, duplicate the layer. Oh, no, forgot to press transform. Press transform. Okay, Control, Alt and Shift, and then just tap T to create these coming down. hold Shift, merge them together, call this middle shading. And then one last time, just with the bottom scroll, B, stroke, duplicate the layer, Control T, Control Alt Shift, and keep pressing T again. Now the reason I've done these separately, even though it's not very visible on this particular scroll, is because obviously, this is intersecting here, and I want to be able to sort of erase that where I don't want it. So top shading, gonna organize these in the order just to make it easier, and I'll just rename this bottom shading. So now with middle shading selected, I can erase any of that that's sort of encroached into this top bit, and I can do the same here. So I don't want any of the bottom shading to be coming into here. Obviously with that bottom one, I can erase this from the sort of the edge of the ribbon, just to tidy that up. So that's coming together really nicely, but there's just one more step I'm going to do, and really easy, and just really adds to the effect, I think. So if I just press Alt and click on the eyedropper on here, you can see all this is some lines with a transparent background. So if I just show that again, and I double click on here, that'll bring up my layer styles. And I want to go to stroke. So what that's done, if you can see, it's done a 2 pixel stroke around those lines. So if I turn that on and off, you can see the effect that's having. And that looks pretty good. So I'm going to just click OK. Now the stroke at the moment is a layer effect and you can't edit it. So I need to make this into a layer. So to do that, I'll right click on it and I'll go to Create Layer. That means now we can treat this like any other layer. We can, delete bits, add bits, but I'm just going to use my marquee. I'm going to select here, and then I'm just going to delete from the stroke layer. And you can see you get that really nice kind of, almost a gradient where that's sort of turning the corner. It's much more visible if you zoom out, but I'm going to do the exact same thing for the middle. So just double click on it. Go to stroke, and that should have remembered the stroke from the last one, and create the layer. Now on here, there's going to be much more sort of shadow coming from this curve here, so I'll leave that in the shade, and then I'll select this curve here to get rid of. Yep, looks pretty nice. And then just again, exactly the same on the bottom. So stroke. Create layer. Ooh, wrong one. There, sort of nice 3D stroke. I know this is much too angular to be nice, but this is really just a tutorial on how to get this lovely curvature and how to get these shadows. Once you're used to the pen tool, you can start these by kind of, having some nice waves with it within the ribbon before it gets to the actual curve around. But this is just a kind of, a very simple way of getting a nice shaded scroll. And it doesn't really end, with that. Some of these areas of stroke don't have to have anything in, if you want a nice highlight. So if in this top shading you thought, well, there'd be a peak highlight sort of here, delete it from the scroll. And similar for the middle, these sort of areas are going to be catching the light, and it might just be nicer to, add that extra little sort of highlight. And they're really easy to pick. These are all straight lines, so you should be able to weed these really easily once you actually, get this design cut into vinyl. So for now, just to finish this off and show you what it would look like, what I'm going to do is just merge all of these and drag them into this group. Let's duplicate the group. Then I'm just going to transform that, flip it horizontal. Let's just fit that on the screen. And there you go. And that's it. Nice and simple. Look really nice with the kind of white font inside here. And like I say, much nicer if you can kind of get more elaborate with the actual shape of the scroll. But that's it really. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you find it useful, and I'd really like to see any of the stuff you guys come up with using any of these techniques, so be sure to share it. Anyway, thanks guys.